I used to think love and business could never betray you at the same time. I was wrong. 2 years ago, my life was perfect, or so it seemed. I had a thriving tech company, a beautiful wife who was my anchor, and a best friend who was also my business partner. We had built everything from scratch: long nights, endless coffee, and the kind of youthful ambition that made sleep seem unnecessary. I believed in us, in all of us, with every fiber of my being. Then came the silence, the kind of silence that enters a home before the truth does. My wife started staying out late. Her eyes lost their light. Her laughter became curated. My partner began missing meetings, offering vague excuses. Something inside me began to ache, a small, quiet suspicion I tried to bury under logic. Until the night I saw them together. I didn't even mean to find out. I stopped by his apartment to discuss an investor deal, and when the door opened, it was her who answered. Her hair tousled, his shirt draped over her shoulders. For a second the world just froze. No sound, no air. Only the sound of my heartbeat, slow, then wild, then breaking. I left without a word. The next morning, my partner filed to push me out of the company. Legally, efficiently. Betrayal, now with paperwork. Within a week, I had lost everything I thought I was. My business, my marriage, my sense of self. I remember sitting alone in my empty apartment, surrounded by the ghost of who I used to be. I had nothing left but pain, and my laptop. For days I stared at the screen, not coding, not thinking, just existing. And then one night something inside me shifted. I thought, if I could build something once, I can build again. But this time it wouldn't be about money. It would be about meaning. I began to design an app, not for dating, not for finding love, but for leaving love. For helping people recognize when a relationship was toxic, helping them heal, helping them rebuild. I called it Phoenix. The nights blurred into each other. I poured every ounce of heartbreak into every line of code. I built it like I was building myself again, carefully, painfully, with purpose. When I launched it, I didn't expect anyone to notice. But they did. Thousands downloaded it. Then, millions. The reviews weren't about features. They were about survival. People wrote to me, saying Phoenix helped them find the courage to walk away from pain, to choose themselves. Each message felt like a piece of my soul being returned. A year later, I stood on a stage, giving my first talk at a tech conference. My hands were shaking, but when I looked out into the crowd, I saw faces filled with hope. I told them my story, unfiltered. The betrayal, the fall, the creation. I told them that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what's real. Now, I travel the world speaking about healing, resilience, and the art of rebuilding. People call me an inspirational entrepreneur. I smile at that, not because it feels true, but because I remember the man I was when I had nothing. And sometimes, late at night, I still think of her, of them. But there's no anger anymore, just gratitude, because their betrayal broke me open, and that was the only way the light could get in. So here I am now, not the man I was, not the man I thought I'd be, but the man I became, through ruin, through love, through fire. And like the name of my app, I rose. It's strange, the way time softens pain. It doesn't erase it, it polishes it, turns it into something almost beautiful. 2 years after Phoenix went viral, my life looked unrecognizable. I was being invited to conferences, podcasts, even late-night shows. People wanted to hear the story of the man who turned heartbreak into hope. The irony was never lost on me. I had built a company on pain, and now I was thriving because of it. But behind the applause and the lights, there was still quiet. Success has its own kind of loneliness, softer, but no less haunting. Every time I saw couples in the audience holding hands, laughing, sharing glances, something inside me would twist. I wasn't sure if I was jealous of their love, or their ignorance of how fragile it could be. One evening, after a talk in Amsterdam, I stayed behind in the empty auditorium. The smell of stage lights and wood polish still hung in the air. My phone buzzed, another notification, another message, another invitation. I didn't answer. I just sat there staring at the rows of empty chairs, wondering what moving on really meant. That's when I met her. Her name was Clara. She was part of the event team, quiet, observant, with eyes that carried stories instead of questions. She walked over as I was packing up my laptop and said softly, "Your talk." It didn't sound like a success story. It sounded like a confession. Her honesty disarmed me. Most people only heard the triumph. She heard the truth. We ended up walking through the city that night, the canals reflecting the streetlights like melted gold. I told her things I hadn't said out loud in years. The betrayal, the loss, the anger, the strange emptiness that comes even after victory. She listened without interruption, the kind of listening that feels like warmth. When we reached the bridge near Keizersgracht, she turned to me and said, "You built something that saves people from staying where love has died. But maybe it's time you learned how to love where it's alive again." Those words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a founder, not as a speaker, but as a man still healing. Over the next few months, Clara and I stayed in touch. At first it was messages about work, ideas, collaboration. Then it became late-night calls. Then laughter. Then silence. But the good kind. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. I didn't realize it, but I was slowly learning to trust again. One day, she asked me if I ever thought about seeing my ex-wife again, for closure. The idea used to terrify me, but something in me had changed, so I agreed. When I finally saw her, in a quiet cafe, years later, she looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. Her eyes were tired, and for the first time she couldn't hold my gaze. She told me the business she started with him had failed, that he had left her, that she was sorry. I didn't feel triumph, I didn't feel pity. I just felt peace. I told her that I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved freedom. And as I walked out of that cafe, into the sunlight of a new morning, I realized that forgiveness is the final stage of healing. Now, when I stand on stage and tell my story, I end it differently. I tell people that healing doesn't end with strength, it ends with softness. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do after the fire is let yourself love again. Clara and I live together now, in a small house near the sea. I still code sometimes, still speak, still travel. But when I come home, and she's there, barefoot in the kitchen with music playing low, I realize that everything I lost once led me here. And maybe that's the real secret. We don't rise from ashes to become what we were. We rise to become who we were always meant to be. Fame has a strange texture. It feels warm at first, soft, flattering, almost intoxicating. But if you hold it too long, it starts to burn. After Phoenix became a global movement, the speaking invitations never stopped. I was on planes more than I was home. From heartbreak to hero, the headlines said. The world loved a redemption arc. But what they didn't see was that I was starting to lose myself again, only this time under the light, not in the shadows. Clara tried to keep me grounded. She reminded me to rest, to breathe, to live in the quiet moments between the noise. But every new deal, every new investor, every new appearance whispered the same dangerous promise in my ear. More. It started subtly. I began saying yes to everything. Book deals, sponsorships, collaborations with people who cared more about clicks than healing. I told myself it was all for the mission, that if I reached more people, I could help more hearts. But deep down, I knew I was feeding something else, the old hunger for validation. One night, after a big media event in New York, I came home to find Clara sitting on the couch, the TV off, her eyes distant. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She just asked quietly, "Do you still remember why you started all this?" I opened my mouth to answer, and couldn't, because the truth was I didn't know anymore. The next few weeks felt heavy. We barely spoke. I threw myself deeper into work, chasing meaning in the metrics, while she drifted into silence. Then, one evening, she told me she was leaving. Not forever, just for space. "I need to remember who I am without you," she said softly. "And maybe you need to remember that too." When she walked out, the door didn't slam. It just clicked. Quietly, finally. For the first time since I lost everything years ago, I was alone again. But this time, the loneliness didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like an old teacher returning. I stopped traveling. I canceled appearances. I took long walks by the sea. The same sea I used to think symbolized freedom. Now it mirrored me. Endless, restless, searching. Days turned into weeks. And somewhere in the quiet, something inside me began to shift again. I realized that even healing can become an ego if you forget the wound it came from. That my mission wasn't to be admired. It was to be real. I rewrote the vision for Phoenix. I built a new feature, not just for leaving toxic relationships, but for rebuilding healthy ones. I called it Rekindle. It helped couples navigate honesty, forgiveness, and growth. It was more complex, more human, and in a way, it was me trying to rebuild with Clara, even if she wasn't there. Months later, I sent her a message. "Rekindle goes live next week. It's the first thing I've built for love, not from pain." She didn't reply, not immediately, but the night before the launch, she showed up. She stood in the doorway, her hair wet from the rain, holding a small paper lantern. "I thought we could light this," she said, smiling faintly, "for everything we've lost, and everything we might find again." We took it down to the shore. The wind was gentle, the world quiet. As the lantern rose, its glow reflected on her face, and for a moment I saw everything. The betrayal, the rebuilding, the fame, the loss, the forgiveness, all of it, converging into one truth. You don't rise just once in life. You rise again and again, through every version of yourself that you outgrow. As the lantern floated higher, Clara took my hand. Maybe we would make it. Maybe we wouldn't. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of either outcome. Because I finally understood. Light isn't something you chase. It's something you learn to carry. Success has a strange way of testing your sincerity. The moment Rekindle launched, I felt something shift. Not just in me, but in the world. People didn't just download it, they lived in it. Couples were using it to rebuild broken marriages. Families were healing. Even therapists began integrating it into their work. It spread faster than I ever imagined, faster than I could manage. At first, I felt proud, humbled even. I thought, maybe this time, I've finally done it right. But soon the messages started to change. Alongside the thank yous came the confessions. We tried to fix it, but it only made us realize we were never meant to be. He used the app's tools to manipulate me. She tracked my responses, said the algorithm proved I was the problem. My creation, my attempt at light, was now being used in the dark. I gathered my team and we worked tirelessly to update, refine, protect. But with every improvement came a new misuse, a new angle I hadn't foreseen. And the media, oh, they loved it. Can love be engineered? The dangerous promise of digital healing. The world had turned my redemption into debate. Clara stood by me at first. She helped me navigate the chaos, but I could feel the distance growing again. Not from anger this time, but from weariness. We were living inside the very paradox I had created, trying to fix what maybe shouldn't be fixed. One night, after a particularly brutal interview, she looked at me and said, "You built an app to help people talk to each other, but you're forgetting how to talk to me." That one landed hard, because she was right. So I did something radical. I paused Rekindle, publicly. I made a statement that shook investors and users alike. Love isn't a formula, I said, and maybe it shouldn't be quantified. Before we can teach others how to connect, we need to remember how to connect ourselves. The world didn't know what to do with that. Half applauded, half accused me of sabotaging progress. But for the first time, I didn't care. I needed to find truth again. Beyond algorithms, beyond headlines, beyond even success. Clara and I took time off. We traveled, not for speeches or launches, but for silence. Morocco, Kyoto, the south of Portugal. We met people who'd used Phoenix years ago. Real people with real lives now. Some had found love again, some hadn't. But every one of them had found themselves. That's when I realized something profound. Healing isn't a destination. It's a rhythm. And maybe love isn't something we build. It's something we remember how to feel. A year later, I launched something new. Not an app this time, a movement. It's called the Ember Project. No algorithms, no screens. Just gatherings. Small circles in cities around the world where people come to talk, to listen, to be seen. Real eyes, real voices, real connection. And it's working. Quietly, beautifully, imperfectly. Sometimes when I see a room full of strangers holding hands, crying, laughing, telling stories of loss and renewal, I think back to the man who once thought healing could be coded. I don't hate him. I understand him. He was just trying to find order in the chaos of the heart. Now I've stopped trying to control the fire. I just help people carry their embers so they can light their own way. Clara and I still have our storms, but we've learned to weather them without needing to fix every crack. Because maybe that's what love really is. Not perfection, but persistence. And sometimes, when we walk along the sea, hand in hand, I look at the horizon and whisper to myself, from ashes to fire, from fire to light, from light to life. It began quietly, as all revolutions do. The Ember Project started with small circles, a few people sitting together in borrowed community halls and coffee shops. No branding, no app, no login screens, just a candle in the center, a shared space, and the promise that whatever was said there would stay there. But word spread faster than I ever imagined. Within a year, there were gatherings in over 40 countries. Within 2, universities were teaching the Ember Method as a new model for emotional resilience. And by the 3rd, global media called it a spiritual movement disguised as therapy. It was surreal, watching something so fragile and human become a worldwide phenomenon. I should have been proud, but instead, I felt a quiet dread creeping in. Because everywhere I went, people didn't just thank me, they looked up to me. Your work saved my marriage. You changed my life. You're the reason I didn't give up. Beautiful words, honest words, but they began to sound like prayers. And I wasn't God. I was just a man who once broke and learned how to build again. The first cracks appeared when corporations tried to partner with the Ember Project. They wanted to turn it into a productivity program, a wellness brand. Governments reached out too. They wanted to use our methods to improve social cohesion. They didn't see the irony. You can't commercialize connection. You can't regulate empathy. But I also couldn't stop them. The fire had grown beyond my control. I remember one particular evening in Sao Paulo, a huge gathering of nearly 5,000 people. I walked onto the stage to speak, and the sight took my breath away. thousands of candles, a sea of tiny flames flickering in the dark. And yet, all I could think was how dangerous it was. That one wrong move could turn those lights into a blaze. I began to talk, but halfway through my speech, I froze. Not from fear, from realization. I didn't want to lead anymore. I didn't want to be the symbol. I just wanted to be part of the circle again. So I stepped down from the stage. Literally. I walked into the crowd, sat cross-legged on the ground, and said, "Tonight there are no speakers, no teachers, no leaders, just us." At first there was confusion. Then, one by one, people sat too. The microphones fell silent, the lights dimmed, and for the first time in years, I felt the same peace I'd felt when I first coded Phoenix. That quiet purity of purpose. After that night, I made my decision. I wrote an open letter to the world. I am stepping away from the Ember Project. The flame belongs to everyone now. If my story began as one man's healing, let it end as humanity's. The internet exploded. Some praised me as humble, others called me irresponsible. Investors panicked. The team begged me to reconsider. But I knew, legacies aren't built by control. They're built by release. Clara understood. She always did. She smiled that quiet smile of hers and said, "You built something that doesn't need you anymore." That's the greatest kind of success, and the rarest kind of love. Now, years later, I live a simpler life. I teach sometimes. I write. I plant trees by the coast. Sometimes strangers recognize me and tell me how the Ember Project changed them. I always smile and say, "No, you changed you." Because that's the truth. All I ever did was start a fire. And if I've learned anything from this long, improbable journey, from betrayal to code, from love to loss, from silence to flame, it's that the real legacy of light isn't in who starts it. It's in who keeps it burning. The sea looks different now. Not because it has changed, but because I have. I'm old. My hands shake when I write, and my steps have slowed, but the air by the coast still smells of salt and renewal. The same wind that once carried my heartbreak now carries peace. Every morning, I walk to the edge of the cliffs with a small lantern. Not as a ritual, but as a reminder. It's the last one I kept from the Ember Project. The flame is weak now, its glass cracked from years of travel, but it still burns. It always burns. Sometimes, when the sun rises, I can see small gatherings down on the beach, people sitting in circles, candles flickering, voices soft and honest. They don't know me anymore. My name has faded from their speeches, replaced by new faces, new leaders, new hearts, and that's how it should be. The world moved on. Phoenix became a legend. Rekindle evolved into something else entirely. The Ember Project became part of culture, a quiet force, living in classrooms, hospitals, prisons, and wedding vows. It doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to everyone who ever dared to begin again. I sometimes receive letters, printed, handwritten, carried across oceans. People still find me. One came last week. It was from a woman in Argentina. She wrote, "My parents met through the Ember Project. They taught me that love isn't perfect, but it's honest. I wanted you to know that their light became mine." I cried when I read it. Not out of sadness, but because I finally understood what all of this had been for. Clara is gone now, peacefully, quietly, just as she lived. The house feels emptier without her laughter, but her presence lingers in everything. In the books she left open, in the flowers she planted by the window, in the way the evening light still fills the room with warmth. Sometimes I talk to her when I walk by the sea. I tell her about the circles still burning across the world, about the children who grow up learning that love can begin again, about how everything we built from ashes now lives as light. And when I return home, I light the lantern one last time. The flame dances, small, fragile, perfect. I smile, because I know what comes next. Not darkness, but rest. Not an ending, but a return. I close my eyes and whisper, "We don't carry the fire forever. We just keep it alive long enough to pass it on." Outside, the sea keeps moving. The waves keep breathing. And somewhere out there, someone new is lighting a candle, not knowing where the flame began, only that it matters. And that, I think, is enough.